Hey everyone, Card Cafe here, and I'm here with a deck profile for a deck I've been so excited about. I've been waiting for this deck for it feels like months, but it's finally here. Set 11 is here, and it brings my blonde boy. Look at him in all of his glorious FFR art. First pack of our case. So happy he is here, and we're going to talk about him. I'm so excited. I love this deck. Let's get into it. So, firstly, let's talk about the Riot Line. The classic boys, the trio that's been here since the beginning. You have your generic starter in Crimson, Lion, Cub, Griff. Just like all the other ones, when you ride on him, if you go second, draw a card. Nothing too special, but the name matters. Then our grade 1, Golden Boy Jr. himself, Knight of Elegant Skills, Gareth. So, his thing is that when you ride over him with Biomane, you get to search your deck for the Reign Supreme King of Beasts order, which we will talk about in a little bit, and just add it right to your hand. On Rearguard, he's also a 10k booster / beater if you're on Ezel, I believe. We don't run extra copies of him, so that part doesn't matter. We're really just here for the name and also for that search for the order. But the one that actually matters is the main kind of gimmick of the deck is our boy over here, Biomane. So, when you are on turn 2 and you've rode into him, he has an axe skill, which says, if you have Gareth and Criff, specifically these two, in the soul, you can discard a card and just immediately jump right up to grade 3 and ride the boy Ezel himself. So if you're going first, this is amazing because you get to just skip right up to grade 3 and your opponent's still at grade 1. Which is awesome because you can just then punch them in the face really hard that turn, and then if you got it set up, you can Persona Ride in on them the next turn while they're at grade 2, and you're swinging for high 20s, low 30k columns, and they can't do anything about it because they're at grade 2. And you're really almost honestly pushing them to 4 or 5 damage that turn. Assuming they don't heal, which, happens a lot. But then, let's bring him back out. The boy himself, we skip up to him while your opponent's on grade 1 or 2. You're going to do that skip skill even if you went second. I thought about it at first. I wasn't sure that you did in certain matchups, especially against like the Stride decks or something, but I found that you still want to do it. One, because a lot of your skills are locked to your Vanguard being Ezel, not to your opponent being at grade 3. And secondly, you want to pre-persona riding immediately. The times where I didn't ride skip when going second, hitting my first grade 3 turn just felt so bad that I was going into my main combo with Ezel and I wasn't Persona Ride numbers. Just feels really bad. So no, you want to make sure regardless when you're going into your main Ezel combos, you have the Persona Ride power. But what are we talking about when we say in Ezel combos? So, I love this card so much. He's got a few skills. One, you have to ride over him with Ezel. You can't run any other like weird text and try and ride over him with a different grade 3. You can only ride over him with Ezel. But that's fine, we don't really care about that because that's all you're doing in this deck. What really matters is the 2 other skills. Firstly, at the beginning of your ride phase, very important beginning of your ride phase, before you Persona Ride, don't mess that up. I have a couple times. Don't forget, before you Persona Ride, if you have 3 or less units, so units including himself, another thing that you have to keep in mind, not rear guards. You soul boss 1, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, call a grade 3 or less unit to the open rearguard circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck. So this is good, especially right now, where we're still in a pretty retire, bind heavy meta, especially now you got Vermilion running around, you still got Gentiva, Messiah, Jet. You're losing your board, plus you're putting stuff to the bottom of the deck a lot. So it's nice to be able to just fill it back up immediately right at the start of the turn. So I love that skill a lot. But the skill that really shines is his 3rd skill, when he attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard. So, unfortunately, and also probably fortunately for the health of the game, you can't do this skill when you ride skip, but it's still a really good skill. When you attack a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, counterblast 1, look at 7 cards from the top of your deck, choose up to 2 grade 3 or less units from among them, and call them to open rearguard circles. They do have to be open, but that's not as big as a deal as you might think. And then he also gets 10,000 power to the end of the turn, and you shuffle your deck. So really, a couple of really good things there. One, you're pretty much guaranteed 5 attacks once your opponent is at grade 3 every turn. Like I said, it's really easy to clear your board, and we'll go over that as we go ahead, but you'll almost always be able to make 5 attacks every turn, which is always a very good skill. And then he himself is always going to be hitting for at least 23. So your opponents can't just drop 115 save, 2 to pass. So we like that. It makes good numbers. He's filling up scored. Very aggressive aggro deck. So the main point of this is just pushing as hard as you can. Now, for the rest of the grade 3s, obviously, because numbers really matter in this deck, we are running the full Persona Ride and the Grow. Because we're so aggro, and like I said, the Persona Ride numbers, not having them really hurt. Otherwise, your numbers, they're not terrible, but you're hitting for like 20 in the 20s, 23, 20, 28. Not bad, but definitely not that hard for your opponent to stop either. So you really want to make sure you're Persona Riding, especially you really want to try and Persona Ride, like I said, if you go first while your opponent's on grade 2, because that just hurts really hard. They just cannot stop those lines. Even if you can't do the multi-attack, you can still hit them with 3 attacks that are all hitting for like 30s while they're on a 10k base. So definitely max Persona Rides. Now to round out the grade 3s, I am running actually 4 copies of Reign Supreme King of Beasts. Now I know a lot of people only run 3 to 2 copies of this deck, of this card. Excuse me. I run 4. Now there's a couple of reasons why I run 4, one of which we will get to in a second. But the other main thing I run is you really want to have this the turn you Superior Ride up to Ezel. The reason why is because the skill sets, 1 is a grade 3 order, so you can't play it till you're on grade 3 anyway. And then if you have a Vanguard with Ezel in its name, you play this card, you look at 7 cards from the top of your deck, take a grade 3 or greater from among them, call them to the board, gets 5,000 power. Really simple, but really good. It's a free top 7 search, call 1, it gets 5k. So you just +1 straight to your board, it gets extra power, which is great while your opponent's on grade 1 or 2. But like I said, you really want to make sure you have this that turn. So you can just immediately plus to your board because you're already discarding to ride up to BO main and then discarding to use BO main skill to go up to Ezel. So you're minusing 2 already. One of those is probably the search of this you got off of Gareth. So you'll have 1 in your hand off that, but a lot of the time you'll find you might have to discard that searched one to be able to go up into Ezel because you don't have a lot of other discard targets. So I like having 4 in the deck because that usually means I'll have another one already in my hand that I can just go ahead and play. So we run 4 to make sure you just have this in your opening hand for sure. And the other reason we really want to make sure we have it in our opening hand for when we do the ride skip up to Ezel is this card. Forefront Knight T-Felt. This card is definitely the MVP of the deck. This card is doing so much for you. So definitely running 4 copies of this. I like this card a lot. This really fixes a lot of kind of holes this deck has. So there's a couple different things going on. The first is when it's placed on rearguard other than by a unit's effect. Now, this means that you can't use it off of being called from Ezel, but it says unit effect, not order effect. So she pairs very well with this card because you can play this card and call her off of that. And then what you get to do if you do that is you Soul Blast 1 when she's placed by other than a unit's ability. You get to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and call it to the board. So it's just another free plus to your board, essentially just for a Soul Blast 1 that you can chain with Reign Supreme. And secondly, she says you can also, if you don't have a unit in that top 5 that you want to call, you can also take an order that's in there and put the order into your hand, which also means you can take Reign Supreme. So that's why they just work so well together, is you can call her off of Reign Supreme, use her skill, search your top 7, and potentially just get another Reign Supreme, add it right back to your hand for the next turn. Unfortunately, you can't chain them in the same turn because you can only play one order once per turn, but it is still just great to have that set up. Now, her second skill, also very important, which is if your opponent is at grade 3 or greater, so the one skill that does require your opponent to be at grade 3 aside from Ezel, if you have 4 other units, she gets 10,000 power. So pretty simple, but also very effective because this deck doesn't have a whole lot of numbers. She's your beater. This is the card in the mid to late game that is really just pushing the damage. On a non-Persona Ride turn, she's swinging for 28 boosted. On a Persona Ride turn, she's swinging for 38, which is just really good numbers and hard to guard. So just a free, even if you don't play the order, she's still 10,000 power. So very good card there. Run it 4. It's your beater. I found in playing in tournaments so far for set 11, this card is just very important and just really pushing a lot and doing a lot for also building your boards. So 4 copies of her, 100%. Next, we actually do run 3 more copies of Biomane in the main deck. And the reason we run Biomane in the main deck at 3 is for his other skill that I wanted to wait to talk about until now. Because his other skill is at the end of the battle that he attacked, does not have to be a Vanguard. You can attack anything on your opponent's side, so long as you have an Ezel Vanguard, so another one of those cards that requires you to be on Ezel. He can get 5,000 power, and if you do that, at the end of the battle, he goes to the bottom of your deck. So this is one of the ways that you're just opening up a rearguard circle at the end of the battle so that you can call something to the circle he was on for Ezel's skill. So really good. That's why we run a max of 3 other copies in the deck. He's also a pretty good beater. He's 15, 23, non-Persona Ride, 33, Persona Ride. Pretty good line still. Not quite as good as Tearfelt, but still 23, 33, which is good. We like that a lot. So clears himself, pretty good attacker. We want to run 3 more copies. And then finally, for the last of the grade 2s, I am actually running Magic of Altercation Turnar. I think that's how you say that. At 3 copies. This is really important for your resource engine because you do go through a good bit of Counterblast and a good bit of Soul. What she says is pretty simple. At the end of the battle that she attacked, while boosted, she can go into the Soul if you have 3 face down damage. And then she goes to the Soul, countercharges 1. Simple, very effective though, because you are definitely going to get to 3 face down damage pretty quick in this deck. So you'll get to countercharge 1, and you'll get an extra soul to help fuel your soul blasts. So it's just a really important engine, keeps you going in the mid to late game, and make sure you don't run out of resources. Your opponents can't starve you out of resources. So definitely run 3 of her. Next, for the grade 1 lineup, this is pretty straightforward. This shouldn't be any real surprise to anybody who knows anything about this deck. We're running the other MVP at 4 of the good old Listener of Tooth, Dindrain. Her newest form keeps coming back, is a great card every time she comes back. So this iteration got 2 skills. The first one is when she's placed on a rear guard, if you have a Vanguard with Ezel, with only 1 clan, Soul Blast 2 and Counter Charge 1. So this skill, I'll be honest with you, at least in this build, I don't think I've ever used the Soul Blast 2 countercharge. You just don't really need it. Turnar is just doing the countercharging that you do need for you for a lot less. I've never been in a position where I had to Soul Blast 2. And honestly, you can't super afford the Soul Blast 2. So that part's not super important, but emergency situations, she can give you a counter charge to be able to use Ezel's skill, for example. But that's not the main reason that she's being run at 4 of. She's being run at 4 for the second skill, which is at the end of the battle that she boosted. If you have, again, a Ezel Vanguard, you can put the other rear guard in the same column that this unit boosted on the bottom of the deck, and she re-stands. This is huge. This is what turns the whole engine on. This deck wouldn't work at all or be functional without this card. This is just too good. You boost something, end of the battle, put on the bottom of the deck. She restands and then can boost the thing that you now call with Ezel's skill to that empty circle that she just made, and she can just put it on the bottom again. That doesn't say once per turn. You can keep doing that skill, which is also really important for matchups like Gandiva and Vermilion. Just keep putting your cards back into your deck. You can put your, and the big thing is you put like Tearfelt back into the deck. You can put triggers back into the deck with that. But Tearfelt's the main one. She's the one you want in the front, and this is just, again, a really great line. This is 28, 38, put her back, call her back, put her back. Just great recycling. It also keeps you from decking out. Excellent, excellent card. I don't think we'll ever not run 4 of in this deck. And then, also to no surprise, we are running 4 copies of the new version of Silver Fang Witch. Also pretty effective skill. She just says when she's placed on rear guard, again, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Gold Paladin in its name specifically, she gets 5k, and then you can also counterblast 1, draw a card. So the 5k is free. If you don't want to just throw her down and just give her 5k, you can do that. But you're almost never going to be in a situation where you're not going to have the counterblast or want to use the counterblast to also draw a card, because this deck doesn't really plus to hand. This is your real way of plussing to hand, is her. Just throw her down, counterblast 1, becomes a 13k, booster or beater, draw a card. Great in the early game, especially in those early turns where you've had to minus to get up to Ezel. This just helps refill your hand and can also put some pressure on your opponent, like I said, just because then she's a 13k. Especially if they're at grade 1, she's then hitting numbers. So 4 of another card, I don't think we're going any less than 4 of, just because you need that draw power. And lastly, the pretty standard lineup of 1 Sanctitude and then 3 copies of the Nation PG. I think everyone knows what these do. Nation PGs, if you have 1 or less card in hand when you use it, you don't have to discard. And Sanctitude, you don't have to discard if your opponent has the text triple drive. Also gets around guard restricts, because it's a blitz order and not being used to guard from hand. So nothing really to say there. Finally, trigger lineup. We have 4 copies of Blade Feather Eagle, the effect crit. The go to soul to give 2k actually is kind of relevant in this deck, because you can sometimes find yourself in an emergency situation where you're low on soul and you need it, and this can occasionally give it to you. The 2k is not really relevant, but the go to soul occasionally is relevant. So we do run 4 of that, and then 3 copies of just any generic crit. Like having this just because this can make good numbers. Like I said, if you want to just have this in your hand, you can just throw it in front of Dindrain. Dindrain then is hitting as a 13k to 23k line, depending on if you Persona Ride, and then it just goes back to deck, and you'll shuffle with Ezel's skill before you drive check, so it's great. So, 7 crits. Then we are running, as the other trigger of this deck, I am running 4 effect draw triggers. As much as I would like to run fronts, as I mentioned, aside from Silverfang Witch, there's no real plussing in this deck to your hand. So you really can't justify not running 4 copies of the draw trigger. And of course, you want to run the effect one that just says if your opponent's a grade 3 or greater, it's a 10k shield. So 4 copies of that, because you really do need the draw power. And for the heals, right now I am doing 2 generic, 2 crit still. I think this is going to change now that set 11 is out. I am probably going to run more restand heals. I'm not quite sure how many, but for right now, I might do still 2 generic, just select generic and then go 1 restand effect heal. Just because now we got Minerva running around, plus Willista, so restanding is a little bit more relevant, but the crits are still always going to be good because Gandiva, Messiah, Dejeweled, and I like the generic. So right now we'll stick with the crits because you still see a lot of Gandiva, but the restand, if you want to run the restand heal, I definitely don't blame you. You could also make an argument also for 4 generic, but I still like the crit ones just because Gandiva is Gandiva. And now for the OT, I am running the red OT from Festival Collection. Just because this is a pretty aggro deck. I like the ability to, if I check it, I get to pick a unit, restand it. Definitely comes in pretty clutch. It's pretty hard for an opponent to be able to stop 2 100 million swings, especially if you check this while you're on Ezel and they're in grade 1 or 2. If you want to run the blue one that gets a crit and takes a card from your drop, that's definitely not a bad play. The crit is almost always going to be relevant, and taking a card from your drop is pretty good. I just found that's less relevant in this deck than in others because you're putting a lot of stuff just back into your deck. And so aside from like perfect guards and persona right targets, which you're not really going to have in the drop zone depending on where you're at in the game, the take from drop just isn't super useful in this deck versus the restand I think very much is. So yeah, that's what I got for my Ezel. I've been really enjoying this deck. I've been waiting so long. I got my FR that I just need to get more. It looks so good. It looks so good. The deck's really fun. It's not the craziest deck, especially with Minerva running around in the same nation, but it's a deck I have a lot of fun playing. There's a lot of combos you can do, a lot of multi-attacking. It's always fun to watch your opponent's face if they don't know what's coming and you went first to just jump up to Ezel while they're in grade 1. It's priceless. Like there's few things to beat the look on someone's face when all of a sudden they're a grade 1 and they're facing down a 13k. It's also really fun to watch people's reactions in that same vein on their turn 2 turn, their grade 2 turn, and they try and attack and realize that their 10k grade 2s aren't hitting your 13k base. It's pretty amusing. So I just have a lot of fun with this deck. It's fun to play. I've played Ezel since Ezel came out in OG Vanguard, so it's one of my favorite units of all time. I'm just super happy he's back, and I plan on playing this deck for quite a while. I know we got the promo coming. That promo is, both for better or worse, a very good card that we're gonna need 4 of. And so we're gonna be doing this again, where we gotta hunt down 4 copies of a promo. That's gonna be hard to get and very expensive. Thanks, Bushy. I just love that. But yeah, let me know what you think. If you have any questions or concerns, put them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer and talk more about this deck. But otherwise, keep an eye out for more from us. Thanks.